enough information done. We just have to trust you that you know what the schedules are, you know what the usage is, you know what the foot traffic is. There's just so many things dealing with this that it's hard to make a determination from a usage standpoint. But I would like to ask you a question. It looks like you've kind of gone to, if I may, the extremes in as far as you can go in cutting hours here on what you proposed.
We've looked at, I'm sorry?
Is that correct?
We've looked at the numbers that in terms of how to approach, how to get to that target of $500,000, what would get us there. And so we've looked at opportunities within the department across the board to get us there. And so these are, you're right, these are extreme numbers to get us at those numbers.
I understand that. That's the exercise we're going through. What I asked you was, these hours that you've placed throughout this PowerPoint, are these pretty much the extreme number of hours that you would cut without further or just totally disrupting the whole program that you're presenting here?
I think that the hours are extreme, to answer your question.
Okay.
I think that in terms of if you're focusing on just one of those things to get you to the 500,000, just that will get you there. But if you're looking at multiple, going to a buffet and choosing multiple things to lessen the stress of a particular area, I think a little bit later we might see that as well.
Okay, well, that's what I was getting to. Thank you. Actually, you know, instead of cutting 14 hours, maybe cut 7. Will that equate to 225 in savings if we cut half the hours, or how would that balance out?
We'll have to go back and calculate what that would be. This is based on getting the numbers to what you see here now. Without being able to do that at here at the podium, I can't.
Well, we're trying to do that because you've given us some pretty much extreme options. So, I mean, the goal is to try to make this as painless, effortless, and still without the stress of disrupting all the programs. Mm-hmm. And it can be done with maybe not eliminating so many hours, mm-hmm. Maybe 7 hours here, 7 hours there, increasing the fees a little bit here and there to obtain that goal. I think that's kind of, in my mind, that's what I'm trying to get to, without eliminating a program at all, without having to deal and go into the hotel motel tax at all, which I would be opposed to. But I think there's a way to do it if you nibble at a little bit here and there, and that's kind of the question I asked you, and you just said that it's possible.
Right. Well, we can go back and take any of these and show you a different number, but you add more back to the cost of what you're asking me not to cut. So if you're talking about the recreation centers, and we're talking about option 2, if we are not looking at, say, 14 hours, and you want to look at 7, we can show what that would look like as well.
And let me just say this, we're not even talking about revenue generated. So when you add the revenue generated, that reduces that 500,000 that you're talking about, the goal. We haven't even talked about that. And at some point in time, I'd like to get to the point again of what that 5,000 equates to, what you're factoring in. I need to really understand that. And I'll circle back to that at the right time. But you're not factoring in revenue being collected on the aquatic center. I think we've already determined that.
I'm not following you, sir. Are you talking about option 2, or you've moved on to another option? I'm not clear where you are right now.
You're talking about a goal. We've already determined this at prior meetings. You're talking about a goal of finding $500,000.
That's correct.
Okay, we're not including the revenue generated on this facility, whether it's 100,000, whether it's 200, whether it's $500,000. Am I right?
The revenue projections that we've used is what we've generated in the past, which is around 215. The
Right.
contractor in their proposal had estimated around $500,000 in revenue generation. And I think you and I've had this discussion before. I'm not comfortable including that $500,000 in the budget until we see that contractor in place and determine that revenue generation is accurate. Our numbers are closer to around 215. So taking a conservative approach, I think you want to wait and make sure the revenue's generated before you include that as part of the equation.
Well, we do have, the thing about that, we do have two actuals. USA Pools, when they were here, did generate revenue, so we know that's an actual, and they did a bad job at it. And that was what, 200 and what?
215.
215. So maybe that's the number we're looking at, and they admitted that they did not do any marketing or sales or anything like that.
We do believe that
So-
there's the potential to generate additional
Correct.
revenue, but I think you want
Correct.
to at least,
I understand, but you have to enter that into the equation. You can't keep that on the side unless you plan to do something else with it.
no, I think you need to wait and validate that revenue generation with a new contractor, just to make sure that you don't overextend the revenue projections.
Well, in going through this exercise, we have to include it. You cannot just leave it on the sidelines. You can't do that, because then we're cutting programs. We're making decisions here based on a mystery number that we're saying that's over here. It's part of this $500,000. It's part of the $500,000, like it or not. The actual that we have from Parks and Recs is what? How much have you generated year-to-date in revenue on the facility?
215 was the annual revenue generation.
I'm talking about current with Parks and Recs. What have we generated?
Well, at this point in time, and I'll let James respond to that, but at this point in time, Parks and Rec is operating at kind of a bare minimum. They're not doing programming, they're not doing marketing.
And-
So the revenue generation is not what it was prior at 215.
I understand that, and that's been stated too, but what is that number? 100 and what?
Do you have-
40, 60?
I can look that up. I don't know that we have. About 180,
180, and we're how many months into? We got how many more months to go?
3.
3 more months to go. Okay, so we know it's over 200. That's a pretty good actual. And, we did have a plan that was put out there from the vendor that said that they believed that they could generate $500,000 in revenue. They also loaded up their budget with money for marketing and sales within the community. So I'm thinking that's all a part of it. So it could be achieved. But it's important for this council to understand that you subtract that revenue generated from this $500,000 we're talking about here. So when we look at reducing just a little bit here and there, we can obtain that goal unless there's another aspect of this that we don't understand in the budget of Parks and Recs.
If you want to use the additional $300,000 that the vendor has made in their proposal, that can be part of the equation. I would just caution you until we actually see that revenue being generated before we include that.
We can't deal with caution when we're looking at cutting programs and cutting programs for kids and things like that. We got to be as actual as we can. And that's a fact, Mr. City Manager.
We've had a tendency, and a good tendency, to be conservative. Now, we can do it the way we recommend doing it, or we can do it the way you recommend we do it that we might not agree with. And so you can, because we're going to recommend it to you the way we feel comfortable with. And so, and then, of course, council, you're the legislative body, you can say, well, no, this is how I want you to do it. And we'll do it, and we will just say that we don't recommend that.
I think there lies some of the conflict. It would probably have been easier a long time ago for us to just pick a vendor and just let you figure it out and take the money out of the reserve. That would have been a very easy approach to take. But as city manager, from my position, the citizens' position, everybody's trying to understand what we're dealing with here. And there's a lot, you're asking this council to make executive decisions with very limited information. That's why it's taken so long. And, it's not easy to work through this thing, but I still have questions on the decision-making process. Just by what I've seen and what I know that's out there, I have questions.
Well, let me just say, I'm not asking you to make an executive decision. I will be happy to make the executive decision. The question is whether you will accept it.
Well, I think we can get to that point. I think that's what the
And
objective
so, I
is
mean,
today.
if you want the executive decision, we can go directly to the recommendations, and we don't need to spend the time talking about rec centers and senior centers, because I don't recommend that.
Well, I
I
would
can tell you
probably-
that right now, I don't recommend it.
Well, it's pretty clear from my perspective and the council's perspective from day one what the objective and the goal of the city's been. And I think from our perspective, where we're wrestling is that we understand that the city is not in a position to take on more labor cost. That once you take on these labor costs, they're going to continue, they're going to escalate, they're going to grow. The city, it costs the city a lot more to staff and manage a facility than it does a private contractor, i.e. the DOT. Look at the DOT now. They have gone third-party management with pretty much all their operations, and they're doing it because the private sector can do it for a lot less. And that's what we're struggling with, is taking on the extra labor costs, the benefits, the health benefits, all the other things that come along with it. I think that's what this council is struggling with,
Well-
because I'm very cautious in creating a whole new division of the government in the situation that we're in with the challenge of our budget, our budgetary challenges.
Well, just remember that my position, and I've stated it very clearly more than once, is that as city manager, we don't want to operate the aquatic center in-house. We want a third-party contractor. I said that day one, and I stand by that
I just
today.
said that. I just said that.
And so I'm ready to do the third party. In fact, we got we refer to it as vendor A. We've had vendor A for months, just sitting and waiting. And so we can move
No,
forward.
we can't. No, you voted on it last week. Did
No, we
not
didn't vote on you voted to say that you want to contract it out, but
Right.
before that, the room
You wanted to
was
see where the
full.
money was coming
The
from.
room was full, and everybody wanted Parks and Rec to do it. But
Mm-hmm.
when we got ready to do it early on, a year or so ago, I said, we don't want to do it. We got the footage sitting in this seat. We don't want it in-house. And so, and now that I think we got some direction at the last meeting that you want a third-party contractor, I think that's what you voted on.
We're just trying to find
You
the
know,
money to pay
in
for it.
fact, at the next meeting, next Tuesday, I plan to bring vendor A, if that's where we are. So if vendor A is just waiting, so I'm ready to do
I
that.
thought we decided that last time. Vendor A, we're just trying to find the money
Yeah, we
for
did.
it. Okay, let's see. Mayor Pro Tem?
In talking about this $500,000, the budget for the total operation of the aquatic center is more than $500,000.
It is.
So even if you take the $180,000 that they made, that they expect in revenue, that's going to be taken from the total budget, not just from this $500,000.
Well, we have a budget roughly $850,000 and generating 180 to 215,000 in revenue. And I hear what Councilor Davis has said, and when we know that we are consistent with revenue and we can say 200,000, and I think, Councilor Davis, you would be right that we would need $300,000 to get us to the 500,000 that we need to make for a $1.2 million budget, which is what's needed to have it fully financed and operational. That's what we're trying to get.
But
Let me
see-
ask
see,
a question about money before you go on, because I'm confused. I thought that the $212,000 or whatever it is was part of that calculation that James has shown now several times that left a net delta of $500,000.
That's correct.
That's right. So the $212,000 is already, if we were not making no revenue, we'd need to find $712,000.
That's correct.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we've budgeted the 200,000 in revenue as a projection.
Well,
The contractor is proposing 500,000. You have to remember that USA Pools also proposed 625,000 in their proposal and generated 180. So
Yeah.
we want to make sure that our revenue projections aren't overstated.
So this number takes into consideration it takes off what we believe we will get in revenue based on past history and leaves a delta or a difference, a negative difference of $500,000. And I know
correct.
James has a slide to that effect because we've seen it 3 times.
That's correct.
Well, why don't you, James, while you're doing that, if you can have an assistant or somebody, find that slide in Dr. Worsley's PowerPoint presentation he's made several times where he adds up Company A and he adds up the city's totals, and then he comes up with what the difference is, and then he says that for 89 hours, there's a delta, there's a difference, there's a negative difference. See if you can find that, and then we'll make some copies and pass it around so we don't have to go through that again.
And the reason we're sitting here talking about this stuff now is because USA Pool screwed it up. They were gonna they were supposed to be the best there was. What we were told, they were the best there was to operate a natatorium. And if that's the best, Lord forbid what we're gonna get.
Okay. All right, we've got Counselor Thomas.
For fiscal year 16, the year that we're in now, Parks and Rec was budgeted for $653,800 for contracted services. Is all of that 653 for the aquatic center? Or are there other contracted services that are included in that budget line item?
The aquatic centers.
It's all for the aquatic center. And then there was an additional, if I understand correctly, $170,000 for utilities for the aquatic center, right? Is that
Yes,
correct?
That's correct. Water.
So for a total of $825,800 was what was budgeted for the aquatic center for FY16, the current year.
Yes.
Okay. To date, how much, and I know that we stopped the contract with USA Pools prior to FY16, and I believe that we are using that budget line contracted services instead of paying it out to somebody else to run the aquatic center. Is that correct? That's where you're getting the money to run the aquatic center, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Of that $653,000 in fiscal 16, how much have you spent?
We're looking for that, Counselor.
I do have the monthly operations, but it's not total, so I'd have to total it up. But we're looking at approximately 70,000 a month, 73, 68,000, 63,000, 50,000, 57,000, 59,000, 72, and 76. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So about 8 months at 70,000, we're about 560,000. And that excludes the time that Becky and the salary of Becky and Holly.
Right, okay,
So
so,
more personnel, lifeguards, and then the operational costs associated with the facility.
just for rounded numbers, Ms. Hodge, if we could, we budgeted about $650,000, and we've spent to date about $550,000. Would that be?
Well, you need to count the utility, this includes utilities as well. So you'd have to count the 653 and the 170.
So of the 825, we have spent 560?
Yes, ma'am.
Approximately.
Yes, ma'am.
The $500,000 that you are asking us to find, what will that be applied to? Will that be, which budget year will that be applied to? Is that going into FY16 or is that going into FY17?
That would be part of the budget for FY17. I think at a prior presentation, what Parks and Rec had presented was they would continue to operate the facility as is until June 30th. So this would be getting the contractor in place and approved to begin July 1 for FY17.
Having said that, does that mean that we think we're going to come in for 16 within budget?
Yes, that was the proposal, that they would come in within budget, but that's also Becky and Holly working 80 hours a week.
I understand that. I got that. So
And
we're
no-
talking about,
Well, and limited programming and marketing as well.
right.
They're just holding the
But,
fort
but
down,
they
you
can
know.
continue to operate the aquatic center in the same manner that it has been operated for since July 1 and come in under, at or under budget.
Yes, that is
Okay.
correct.
So what we're really talking about is your budget for 17.
Right.
Yes, that is correct. And to get the contractor in place for
and-
FY17.
And so we've got Company A, Vendor A, waiting, and we need some direction, because we want to bring them in July 1st. We need to know whether they're going to be doing 45 hours, whether they're going to be doing 65, 75, or 89 hours. And the only way we can know that is know that we've got the funding that's needed to do whatever that number is going to be, and to be fully operational with marketing and the works. We can't know that, we can't communicate that to them until we know.
Okay. Okay, I'm trying to cogitate with all of these numbers. So, Mayor, I think that's it for now. I may want to come back to this in a minute, but I'm really, I think one of my frustrations today is that while this is I know that this took more than 10 minutes to put together. I've put together presentations like this and it takes a while. This is stuff we've seen over and over and over and over and over again. There's nothing new here. And I, quite frankly, Mr. City Manager, am ready to get to the recommendation. I think we beat this dead horse enough. And I'm ready to get to the recommendation and move it on and make a decision on what we're going to do.
And Counselor, I don't know if it's fair to my staff for you to think that this is no more than what you've received over the last few weeks. We've come back to you time and time again, and you've given us additional directions that I tried to go through, quite frankly, from quotes in the newspaper from Sunday and from quotes that notes that my staff take. And you've asked for a more specific, more concrete, and this is more specific and more concrete, and if you want us to whittle that down some more, I mean, just like what we're talking about now from 44 to 30 hours, where there's going to be $450,000 saved, if you want, as I think Councilor Davis said, nibble at it, well, we can go and we can reduce that to 225, and instead of laying off 13 part-timers, we lay off 7. We can do whatever you want. It's just that the target, it keeps moving. And sooner or later, I mean, you know, we'll get it narrowed to where you want it, but every time we come, it's something different.
Well, Mr. City Manager, I certainly did not mean to disparage your staff. And if that is what came across, I apologize for that. I did not mean to do that. I know that your staff has done a tremendous amount of work in putting this stuff together. But quite frankly, I don't see anything new in the material that we've been given today. We have been given some specifics, as is seen here on the, the change in the hours, but the amount of money that we're talking about is the same amount of money. I'm
Because
sorry.
you want to know the impact.
I just am going to try to be quiet until you get to the recommendation. That's going to be hard for me to do, but I'm going to try to do it and just wait for your recommendation.
Great, thank you. Counselor Huff.
I'm just trying to get to the numbers. The numbers are not adding up right now. With 800,000, we're looking for $500,000, so we're looking at a total of 1.3. So if there's this 200,000 figure, if that's involved in this, then we're down to, we're looking for 300,000 versus 500,000.
Included in the revenue projections already in the general fund is $200,000. So that's already part of the budget for FY16 and going forward into, obviously, we're in preparation for FY17.
So that 200 will be added to the 8?
That 200 is revenue projections. The expenditures related to the operation of the aquatic center is approximately 1.3 million, 1,242,000.
Right.
What we have budgeted is about 825,000. So that difference that we need on the expenditure side of the equation is about $500,000. If you increase the revenue projections from 200,000 to 500,000, then obviously that provides additional budgeted dollars available to make up that difference of the 500,000. But you're assuming that their revenue projections are accurate. We're not as comfortable with that $500,000 revenue projection as the outside vendor who's not familiar with our market and our area.
No, I'm not on the
So
500. No, not that part. I'm saying at
We're
800.
comfortable with 200.
I'm saying if you're comfortable with 200, that's what I'm saying. 800 and 200, we had $1 million. We're looking for 300.
The 200,000 is already in the equation for revenue projections.
It's in with the 8?
It's revenue as expenditures. We have 200 budgeted in revenue. We only have 800 budgeted in expenditures. We need 1.3. So we need to budget an additional $500,000 to operate the expenditure. The 200,000 hasn't changed. It's still in the equation. The net difference of what is required for a contractor or for Parks and Rec to run it at 89 hours is about $500,000.
Just help me to understand. I'm losing the 200 in this equation. I got 800 here that's budgeted,
Yes, and 200's budgeted.
and 200 in addition to the 8?
The 200 is revenue.
Revenue on
Is-
top of the 8 that we budgeted.
Well, the 8's expenses, so you have to
Eight's
subtract
expensive.
it.
So let's say we have,
I'm
the
saying-
general fund has $150 million budgeted.
No, hold
out-
on. No,
Okay.
I want to do this my way today.
Okay,
We got $800,000 budgeted
on the expenditure side.
on the expenditure side. Okay, that's going to be spent, money gone. Okay. Now, on top of that, we are projecting 200,000 of revenue.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, you're saying we need $500,000, 500,000. So my question is, are we looking for $500,000? Or are we looking for 300
You're looking for a
in this
$500,000.
equation?
You're looking for a $500,000.
Okay. so
Unless
this-
you
this takes
increase your
us-
revenue projections from 200,000 to 500,000, then that additional 300,000 in revenue projection would offset the $500,000. We're not comfortable with that at this
I'm
point.
saying, yeah, it would offset, I mean, but if we create the 500, the $500,000 as the accepted revenue producer, that puts us at 1.3.
If you accept the $500,000, that increases your revenue projections from 200,000 to 500,000.
Right.
That leaves the deficit at 200,000.
Okay.
It reduces the 500,000 that you need on the expenditure side to 200,000, because you're saying I'm going to collect an additional 300,000 in revenue.
Okay,
That's an option that we're not comfortable with, but
Okay.
that is an option.
okay, well, can you put that in print so we can follow this number game?
Sure.
To know where we are?
Sure.
Yeah, so when the recommendations come to us, we'll
Yeah,
understand.
that's Counselor Allen just pointed out, that's the slide that I was asking for, James, because you've gone through that before, where you had your numbers. Okay, put it up so people can see that equation. Some people may have missed a meeting, or it's just been, a lot going on.
This is the comparison between Company A and Parks and Rec. you look at the last two lines, the total cost proposed by Company A is $1,267,000. By Parks and Rec was $1,242,000. And you can see the revenue projections of Company A was $525,000. The revenue projections for Parks and Rec was $250,000. So what's budgeted for revenue projections at this point is just around $200,000. So if we increase our revenue projections up to what Company A is proposing, then that deficit moves from $500,000 to $200,000. But we're just, would advise caution on doing that until we can see that Company A can produce that revenue generation.
I'm saying if we had Company A producing at $500,000 and Company B at $250,000, I'm still seeing this rounded figure of $300,000.
That's correct. There is a $300,000 difference in
Right.
the revenue projections between Parks and Recreation and Company A. If council accepts the $500,000 based on Company A, then that deficit is now $200,000 as opposed to $500,000.
Okay, I mean, I'm looking at the slide, and if Parks and Rec was running the aquatic center, and they hit their revenue projection of $250,000, then it's the difference of $250,000 and $525,000. If Company A takes it at $525,000, everything's on point?
Then the deficit's only about $200,000
Okay,
if they meet those projections.
okay, thank you.
Okay.
And the thing is, you know, if you like Company A's projection and you accept it, and Company A gets down the road like USA Pool did, and Company A then comes to us and says, we projected 525, but we only see 200 or 250, then you got a deficit. Then you're going to have to cut back hours, you're going to start scrambling, we're going to be back before you, and it's going to be shut down, cut the hours at the aquatic center. And so, as I said earlier, we have a tendency to be conservative. We want to get it right.
On the conservative side, I'm
And-
just trying to find out what the conservative number it really is.
It's somewhere between 180 and 215
Okay,
at this point
okay.
For revenue.
of revenue.
And the difference is about $500,000.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, Counselor Baker.
Thank you. I'm not sure who to address this to, but I'm sure we'll all get involved in a minute. On one of your slides earlier, where we had expenses projected for this fiscal year, July to June. All right, 6 months of that, we were operating it, July through December, right? And we've got the actual numbers for the cost.
That's
And I'm not
correct.
talking about revenues, but not revenue.
Yes.
This is actual cost.
Yes,
We ran it for 6 months for $373,000.
that's correct.
Okay.
Without a
And we haven't made an
programming and
allocation
marketing
for
and
management.
salaries of,
We
that
haven't
are
made
not
an
included.
allocation for executive management.
that's correct.
Okay. Now, for the next 6 months, to take us through January through June, to finish out the year, there was a 23% increase in the projected cost. And I don't know what that was to cover, whether it was to cover some marketing or some management allocations, I don't know, but that's a pretty healthy increase. But given that, it brings the total cost, expenses, to $832,000. I'm getting lost where we go from and this is without revenue, from 832 to 1.27 million in cost
Right.
for the
Now,
new vendor or at the updated cost numbers.
Jamal,
Because once you sign a
Look at that.
contract for 1.27, that's the cost. Even if the cost is 800,000, it's now 1.27.
Right.
And that's where and the numbers I have personnel, operations, utilities. It's all in here.
That number does not include the executive, the aquatics division manager, or the facility manager, because Holly and Becky are doing that and their salary is paid somewhere else. It also doesn't include the marketing and programming expenses related to the operation of the facility. The way they're operating it is just keeping the doors open. There's no swim
understand.
programs. And so that 800,000 is kind of a bare bones, just
Okay.
keeping the doors open. So that additional expense is hiring a facility manager, the aquatics manager, and doing programming at the facility and marketing.
But at some point, you'd have to look at if those costs are going to outstrip the benefits and the revenues, you wouldn't do them all.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think we
And
can,
so if you went to a model where you moved it to an authority and just brought in one pool expert, or somebody that knew what they were doing, and let them look at restructuring, I don't see how you get to 1.3 million.
Well, both
Well,
Parks and Rec
let me-
and the third-party vendor made a proposal and put together numbers based on the RFP that we put together
No,
and
I'm-
what
right.
the expectation was for the operation of the facility. If you scale that back and say, we don't want marketing, we don't want, swim programs and those kind of things, then you can operate it at bare bones, which is how they're doing it.
But if you did bring in, and you did absorb the salary of an aquatics person who knows how to do a lot of that, it still leaves you way short of the 1.2, and they may be able to bring those other skills to the table without that additional cost.
well,
And this is without revenue. Once you offset that against revenue, the numbers even look a little bit better. And like you're saying, you're afraid to project the revenue too high. I'm not comfortable running the cost up to 1.3. I don't, that's where I'm getting lost.
well, and Madam Mayor, that is why I want a third-party vendor. Because you tell us what you want in the budget. If it's 850, we'll go get a third-party vendor, which we've attempted to do, and they've said, we'll do 45 hours for you a week for 850,000. We'll do all this stuff that they've got described in that line item up there. And so I am just more comfortable with a third-party vendor so that they'll give us all they can give us for that 850,000.
Which they,
I was going to say, all the numbers I just went
Well,
over was
That's
89
89
hours.
1.2 million. I'm saying if it's, to Councilor Baker's point, if he believes that we should be able to do those things for $830,000, then that's what our budget ought to be.
And I agree.
And I think we go out with a third-party vendor and we get the most that we can get for $830,000.
right.
But I don't think you're going to get 89 hours. I don't think you're going to get 65 hours. I think you're going to get 45 hours. And if
Or-
we're comfortable with that,
Well-
which I am, if that's, the will of the body,
I understand.
that's what we are. And we can
Well-
bring you that proposal next Tuesday.
But you're assuming that's the only option.
No, we had
'Cause we-
an
no.
RFP.
I know, but we talked about, I don't think it's come to the table yet. We've talked about an authority model.
Well, and I'm fine with an authority model, but I can tell you now that, we've got a few authorities around
understand
that we can use as examples, and they make more money than what my people make, and they are governed by their authority, and we can do that too. I'm just saying to you that the governing authority is not going to relieve us of the expense of our facility.
Right.
They are still going to
Follow.
come in, and that governing authority is going to be just like John Milam at Bull Creek, is going to be just like David Beavens at the Trade Center, and I can go down the list, and they have a governing board, but everything else that is there. All the expenses are ours.
Right. But the authority model, I was trying to take some of the pressure off Parks and Rec.
That's what I want.
Because to be quite honest, and I think we all know that, they're really not geared to run it. They really don't want to run it. They've worked themselves to death, and I think they're burnt out from running it. And they've got other things they need to do with the people that they have. And I don't think this same path is going to work.
Yeah.
I think you need a person that you could bring in to run it But I don't know that it has to be a private vendor at $1.3 million. If you had a skilled person that knew how to do some marketing and programming and have them relook at the fee structures, that you might could absorb that salary and still be way under the $1.3 million, and that's still without revenues considered.
Well, and I'm fine, again, with an authority
I just-
or a third-party vendor. Either way you want to do it, and you give us a budget, and we're going to get the most juice we can get out
I
of
understand.
that with that money.
Right.
And the hours will be what they will be, the marketing and down the line will be what it's going to be for the money you give us. So all we need you to do is tell us. Tell us you want a third-party vendor, or tell us you want an authority, and tell us the budget is $850, and then let us go and do our work. That's all I want.
Okay, and that's.
Is
and
that
that's
fair?
reasonable. No,
I
yes,
mean,
sir, it is, it is. And I'm
That's
not-
all I want.
I'm not being
But
argumentative.
don't beat
Because I'm
us,
trying to help
but
Parks and
not
Rec
to you, but
and
I-
get them some relief,
but-
is really what I want to do.
Yeah, and I'm saying, not to you, but the community and others should not beat us up when you tell us we want an authority or we want a third-party vendor, and you have $850,000, put together the hours, the marketing, and tell us what you're going to do with that $850, and we're going to bring it to you.
And I'm fine with it, because the only perspective I have are actual numbers that come out about 832. And you say, well, if you run up to 1.3 million, you might make another 100,000 in revenue.
Well, and let me,
That's where I'm getting completely
yeah,
lost.
and I understand, and let me just say this, and then I'm
No,
done with it.
Yeah, I am too.
But Dr.
I appreciate your time.
Worsley came in here a week away from presenting an aquatic center budget. Even at that time, he came up with 1.2. And then when we did it, we went out for USA Pool, they lowballed it. They lowballed it. And we got excited because, yeah, private sector can do it better. And they brought it, they could do it for $825,000. And we got what we got for $825,000. So we brought in Dr. Worsley and we said, open the doors and get you some lifeguards. And they're keeping it in line. And so Dr. Worsley didn't talk to the company A. They submitted proposals at the same time. He came up with 1.2 again. They came up with 1.2. So that number keeps coming around, 1.2. It's a real number. And so, you know, that's just, I know your calculations and all that, but the real number for a fully financed, fully operational aquatic center, I believe, is 1.2.
Okay.
And so, but we will, it's just like every department we have. When you give us a budget, we make that budget work, and we give you as much as we can give you for what you gave us. And that's what we will do with this. And all we need is direction. Tell us an authority, tell us third party. Right now it's third party, give us a budget, and we're going to set the hours and create an operations based on that.
Right. But what you've seen is the additional jump from 850 to 1.3 or whatever, working through your proposal to cover that. Where has that gotten us? I don't think it's gotten us anywhere, because I've
Well-
listened to this for time after time after time,
Well,
and it's, we don't like this proposal, we don't like this, we don't like
Do you
that.
remember at the last meeting, I said that I was willing to email you the 17 and you just mark through them so that we don't
I
waste
do.
our time on them?
And I agree with that,
Do you remember I asked that?
Yes,
and
sir, I
so-
do.
And so it's killing me to go through
I
the
know it is.
17,
I'm telling you, I hear you.
but I'm following directions.
Well,
And so if you don't want to go through the rest of them, which there's only, I recommend 2 specific things as an executive for you. And they're in my recommendation. And when I put them on the table, you're going to either beat me down and object them, or you're going to accept them. And if you accept what I put on the table, we can go home today. It's 10:46. I can have you out of here by 11:30. I mean, if you accept what I've got something for you. And what I've got is not going to impact the seniors. It's not going to impact the youth and their activity. It's not going to impact, the hours of operations that you're doing. It's going to require that we do something different. And if you want to get to it, we can just go right to it.
Thank you.
But I don't know that, I've heard some feedback that, so are we ready to do that?
Well, hold on, just one comment. I know we've got a crowd here that's sort of relatively new to this because they're the stakeholders that are interested. I just want people to know, because what happened was, if we all go back to the genesis of this discussion, was we put out an RFP after the failed experience with U.S. Pools. They came back with the numbers that you see here as the one who met the criteria from a committee that was put together and had what we thought was the best, most reasonable price. And so we said, great, we're going to take you to council, Company A, and we're going to make the proposal that you accept the responsibility for running the auditorium. And they said, great. And we said, but your budget is only $856,000 or whatever it is. And they said, whoa, Nellie, we can't run 89 hours for $856,000. We can run 45 hours. And we thought, that's not what the community expects. So we came to council and we said, we've got this proposal we want to bring forward, but we're very concerned because the person, the company, has said that if we go forward with the present budget, it'll be 45 hours. And this room was packed fourfold what we have here today, with swim enthusiasts from people with arthritis, disabilities, and people on swim teams, and kids that wanted to learn to swim, and the whole 9 yards. They said 45 hours is not enough. It's unacceptable. It's intolerable. And and then over weeks they presented some things that show a direct correlation between the amount, they say, between the amount we invest and the amount of revenue that comes back because of programming. And of course, the appreciation that the community gets from the use of the facility with increased programming, swim lessons, other types of things. Brian Obeda's in the back, and he presented all sorts of programs, but all of those programs will have a cost, obviously. But they return some in revenue and, of course, enhancement and enjoyment of the community. So that is what has led us here today, is the rub between, very simply, the $850-something thousand that has been budgeted and what the people who use the auditorium and the community expects. Those two things are not meeting. So we either have to, in order to meet the expectations of the people who are stakeholders of the aquatic center, which are more than just the swim teams, it's approximately 1.2. That's our best information. In order to keep it running, lights on, sometimes not towels, sometimes not enough chlorine, so it's shut down, sometimes closed unexpectedly for weird reasons, that's $850,000. Those are our two options. And so what we're trying to do today, after one instruction during all those many processes that we've had, was Mr. Worsley was asked to come back to find the difference of how we might run it at $1.2 million. And that necessarily, within his budget, or monies that are otherwise available for his purposes and mission, and that is what has led us to the 17. And so that's kind of why we're here. So we keep going back and revisiting, the underlying premise, which is 1.2 credible? Is $860,000 credible? Well, it's just what it is. It's what it is, and until somebody can show it different with any sort of validity, I don't know how we accept another number of 950 or something. We've got 860 and 1.2, and those are the only ones the experts are telling us. And as far as the authorities, they're all good options, obviously, but first of all, the private companies have a profit margin. So you have to be just saying outsourcing always results in more efficiencies is economically an invalid statement on its face. That's not true. It depends on what the profit margin is and the economies of scale. It's a basic economic principle. So outsourcing is not always the best thing, and it's not always the cheapest thing. Authorities have a board that sets salaries, not this council, and they are, without exception, significantly higher than the salaries we set as a body, significantly higher. So if we're just looking at employment costs, because we pay the costs of those salaries, whether it's an authority or not. So if you're just looking at whether you want to lower employee costs or whatever, we can provide proof that authorities do not reduce the amount of employee costs. So anyway, we've still got some new counselors in queue. We've got Counselor Woodson.
Thank you, ma'am. City Manager, I'm not sure it's you or Dr. Wesley or Pam that answer my questions. I just want to get some clarification and to kind of get it in the right perspective. The 2016 year budget, there is $825,000 there
That's
for
correct.
the pool, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. What we're trying to do is get either the 1.2 or 860 for 2017.
Correct.
Correct? Okay. In the 8.60 that's been, or 820, that 25 that's been going around and round and round, if I heard correctly to staff, that did not include the management's team's salary.
That's correct.
If that number was included in here, it would be close to the $1.2 million, correct?
Well,
Or incorrect?
Well, because we've not done a lot of the other things, the marketing, it's been bare bones, it would not get to 1.2. It'd be something less for 16 if we included their salaries. It would be more than what it is today, plus, well, it would be what it is today plus their pay.
And that's what I'm trying to get at, because throughout the conversation I'm hearing, we're doing it in backbone, we should be able to do it with 860, but in that 860 is not including the marketing that we're not doing. It's not including the staff. That's my question. Is that including everything or not? Because the way it seems to me is that that dollar amount is not including the difference that the third party will be adding to the budget, which will bring it to the 1.2 or whatever. That's the number we're playing with right now, the $1.2 million. And that's what I need clarification. When you're saying bone minimum, it's $800 and let's say $60 just to play with it, okay? And that's because marketing's not in here, nor the management staff. If we were to put in these calculations during our discussion, those two entities or three entities that were taken out because we're running at a bare bone minimum, the dollar amount will have been higher.
That's correct.
Okay, so I think that's where a lot of the confusion is, because we keep focusing on $860, thinking that that's covering everything, but it's not, because it's not covering the marketing that the new A will bring in. It's not covering the management that is bringing in. And I think that's what's causing the conversation going around, because we're using a number that's not realistic to the number that we need. And that's why I'm asking for that clarification. Because when you hear all these conversations, I don't know about anybody else, but I get focused, and then I get unfocused, and then I get focused. So that's why I'm saying is that we're focusing on 860, which is not a correct dollar amount. And then the other part that I have written here, if we went, let's say, with the new vendor A, just an example, we went with the new vendor A, and we told him, because we're using that 860, we're not putting in the marketing people, we're not putting anything. And that company comes in, they'll run it for 216 at that dollar amount till we figure out what's going on in 2017. Wouldn't that give us a better picture also to say that's not enough? The 860, because this is what I'm concerned about. We're focusing on 860, and that's not the true number.
Yeah,
That's not the true number we're dealing with.
Yeah, we're working with the 825 without having executive staff, we don't have maintenance staff. They're calling maintenance from Public Works. They didn't hire anybody. And so, that's why the number is down. And so, and that's for 16. And that's why we tried to get a direction to say, okay, let us finish out to 2016 through June 30th. And then July 1, if you tell us now, like you did a couple of weeks ago, that you want a third-party vendor, we can go ahead and bring the third-party vendor in and get them to start identifying their people, getting their team together to hit the ground running July 1. And the reason we're having this discussion now is that we really would want to be able to tell them that you're going to hit the ground running in July 1 with 1.2 million or 1 million or 825,000, and then we can figure out, negotiate what we can get for that money. And so we'll finish out 2016, but 2017 is what we're focused on. And if we want to get the budget down, if we want to use Company A, the vendor, if you want the budget to be $820,000 or $1 million, then we can go through there and start marking out what we don't want or what we want to reduce until we get to the number that we can work with, that you give us. And then we'll know what we're going to be able to do for 17. And so we just need the total budget. And we were told that obviously that money is not going to come from anywhere else. It has to come from internally. And so we've been trying to figure out, okay, if we're going to do it, if it's coming from internally, services and programs within Parks and Rec, something's got to give. And how do we make all that happen and come up with money to either have 89 hours or 65 or whatever it's going to be?
I understand all of what you're saying, and I'm on the same page with you. But again, Pam, I don't know if you're understanding what I'm saying. Using the 825, let's say 825, is not a good number to use. For the simple reason is that everyone's focusing on that dollar amount, which does not include maintenance, marketing, or the management staff. I think in our discussion, we should include the total number that's going to be needed.
Right, and if you look at this chart, the 201,802 at the top of Parks and Rec, that is currently not being paid out of the aquatic budget. So the 825 does not include that 200,000 because they're doing two jobs. So that part's not included. Also, part of the 120,600, which includes marketing, that is currently not being done. And then out of the 517,235, only a portion of that is part of the 825. So there are things in addition that are not being done that are not included in that 825.
And that's what I'm talking about, because in our conversation this morning, we're only focusing on 825, which is not the total package.
That's correct. The 825 is only what is budgeted. It's not what we feel would take to operate the facility at 89 hours to include all of those operations. And you did mention bringing the contractor on just for information purposes. The contractor takes about 60 days to mobilize. So we have to give them 60 days to begin operation July 1st, which would be May 1st. So they can't, come in within 2 weeks. We have to give them some time to get their staffing together and be prepared to take over the operation.
Let me ask you one more question. Sunday, I forgot. Give me a second. I think my mom's rubbing off on me.
And come back to you.
Oh, no, it takes too long. Let's say, okay, from the bids that you received, just roughly, I don't want to know if it's the new A or whatever that you chose. What were the numbers roughly coming in? Were they coming in at 1.2, 1.5, 2 million? Roughly, what were they coming with everything that we need? Not what you have been doing, bare minimum.
Right.
Everything we need. On the RFPs you received, roughly, what were the numbers coming?
That's what Company A represents.
I
That
know
was the
Company A,
vendor
but I'm
that was
saying-
selected. Now, we did have other vendors
Mm-hmm.
who made proposals that were lower than this, but they were not evaluated as high as this particular vendor. So this was the vendor that the committee recommended. The other vendors did not meet the expectations that were in the RFP. This one was the one that the committee selected.
And I'm glad you said that, because there was a conversation around the table about having an authority, a committee, and so forth. So there is a committee that was involved in it. And the RFPs are coming about the 1 million more or less, 1 million, 2, 1 million. I'm just gonna use 1 million to make it easier. So